Let's take a look at the passage from Mark that was read this morning, in particular verse 3. Sorry, I just need to get this started again. It says, "And he, being Jesus, said to the man who had the withered hand, 'Step forward.'" So the title for this talk this morning is "Step Forward." I want to start by sharing some of my personal testimony of how I ended up going to South Africa, serving Jesus at Ikitelo. It took me a long time to step forward into what I'm doing now. To be honest, South Africa was one of the last places on earth that I wanted to move to. Over the years following the end of apartheid, I'd met a lot of expat South Africans who'd moved to Australia, and they did not give an attractive picture of the country that they had escaped. So how is it that I ended up there? I need to go back in time over 40 years before my wife Janine and I ever met. God has given Janine an incredible love for children. From the time Janine was a teenager, she had a desire to work overseas with orphans. When we met, Janine was working in childcare, and over her working life, she has worked with vulnerable children. Janine and I married 40 years ago, and at that time, a pastor spoke prophetically over us that he believed that in future, we would be serving Jesus in cross-cultural mission. Janine was immediately excited about that. But for me, my response was, I can see that somewhere in our future. And that is exactly where it stayed for many years. Over the following couple of decades, we started a family, worked to buy a house, and generally went about our lives. We were active members of our church, but we never had any involvement in cross-cultural missions. This began to change in 2003 when, as a family, Janine, myself, Rachel, and Rachel's older brother Andrew participated in our church's first ever short-term mission trip. We went to the Philippines. Following that initial trip, we participated in quite a few short-term mission trips, including to places such as the Philippines, Cambodia, Hong Kong, and Mexico. In 2012, Rachel spent 6 months in Hong Kong with Youth with a Mission. In early 2013, she went on a 2-week trip to Cambodia. On her return from Cambodia, Rachel shared with us that she believed that God was calling her into full-time missionary service. By then, it was over 30 years since that prophetic word was spoken over Janine and myself. As we were now at a stage in our lives when we were starting to think about retirement, it seemed that for Janine and me, serving full-time in cross-cultural missions had passed us by. So when Rachel shared about how God was calling her into full-time service, we supported her 100% and felt that supporting Rachel would be how we would now be involved in cross-cultural mission. Rachel started contacting mission organisations. She arranged to meet representatives from a few organisations at an annual missions conference in Australia called Reach Out. She asked us if we would go to the conference with her, and we agreed as we said we were supporting her. Well, God had bigger plans for me at that conference. The keynote speaker was speaking from the book of Jonah. In his third talk, he was speaking from Jonah chapter 3. He began reading from verse 1. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. It was if God spoke audibly to me into my ear. And God said 2 things to me. The first was, that while I had in my mindset that serving him in cross-cultural mission was somewhere in our future, that's all it was ever going to be. The second thing God said to me was that, like Jonah, he was giving me a second chance. I can tell you, I went home from that conference a miserable person. I spent the next 2 weeks wrestling with God. I had every excuse why I should not make a life change now at this stage in my life and enter full-time cross-cultural missionary service, starting with, I'm too old. I should be preparing for my retirement. This 2-week period was such a struggle, and I was impossible to live with. Janine and Rachel knew something was going on, but they didn't know what. But after 2 weeks, I surrendered to God and I said, Lord, I'll go wherever you want and do whatever you ask. At that time, I had no idea we would go to South Africa. As I said, South Africa was one of the last places on earth that I wanted to move to. But at that moment, I took a step forward in obedience to what God was calling me to. And I've no regrets and rejoice in the blessings that God has brought me since then, and especially in South Africa. There's a lot more to that testimony about how we did end up going to South Africa, but I hope that this part of my testimony can be an encouragement to you. So, what are some of the most mentioned topics in the New Testament? A few that immediately come to my mind are faith, hope, and love. I thought that love would be the most commonly spoken about topic in the New Testament. But after a bit of research, I found that in fact, faith is talked about far more often than love. In fact, faith is mentioned twice as many times as love is. I went to the dictionary for a definition of faith, and I looked at a few dictionaries. So first I went to the Oxford Dictionary, and it said that faith was a noun, and it defined it this way: complete trust or confidence in something or someone, strong belief in the doctrines of a religion based on spiritual conviction rather than proof. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary also said that faith is a noun, firm belief in something for which there is no proof. And the Collins Dictionary also said faith is a noun, strong or unshakable belief in something, especially without proof or evidence. Cambridge Dictionary also says faith is a noun, great trust or confidence in something or someone. All these dictionaries say that the word faith is a noun and talk about belief and even trust. But I believe that Christian faith, the faith talked about in the Bible, the faith that we read about with Abraham and Isaac, is actually a verb. It was when Abraham was prepared to sacrifice his son Isaac that God really knew that Abraham had faith. It's a word of action, not just belief. Faith is far more than belief in God. In the NIV, the subtitle of this chapter, in James 2:19, it tells us that even demons believe in God. But let's have a look at one of the great chapters of the Bible that talks about faith, and that's Hebrews chapter 11. In the NIV, the subtitle of this chapter is Faith in Action. The chapter begins with these two verses. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. So let's look at some of the ancients that were commended for their faith in that chapter. Take a look at the highlighted words in these verses. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. In all these cases, those commended for their faith didn't just believe what God told them, they acted upon that belief. Through faith, they obeyed what God told them, no matter how foolish. Faith is similar to belief, but it's more. While faith surely includes the element of belief, they are not one and the same. Certainly one must believe that something or someone that it exists before it is possible to put one's faith in that person or thing. However, I can believe some things that do not affect my life. I believe that the country China exists. I've never been there, but I believe it exists. However, I do not live my life differently because of my belief. The Bible tells us that this type of belief is not true faith and will not result in a saving relationship with God. To put one's faith in something or someone means that one is putting his or her trust in that person or thing. Who or what one trusts can have far-reaching, even eternal ramifications. It means reliance on, dependence upon that person or thing. I can say that I believe a plane can take me from here to China, but if I'm afraid to get on it, I reveal that I have no faith in that plane. Also, if I do not get on that plane, I have no reason to expect it to take me anywhere. I must exercise my faith in that plane by boarding it if I am to receive the benefits that it offers. Faith is belief plus action. I can say that I believe that a chair will hold me when I sit on it, but if I never actually sit on it, it's just an intellectual thought. I have faith when I actually sit down on the chair. Faith includes our beliefs, but it's bigger than that. Faith requires action. If it doesn't move us to do something or say something, actually take some kind of action, it's not really faith at all. James said it this way. James chapter 2 verse 17 says, "So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless." Until we take action, our faith is just a bunch of words. James says that unless faith produces action, it is in fact dead or not faith at all. Let's look at that whole passage in James about faith and works. What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, and you say, "Goodbye and have a good day. Stay warm and eat well." But then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do? So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. You say you have faith, for you believe that there is one God. Good for you. Even the demons believe this, and they tremble in terror. How foolish. Can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless? Don't you remember that our ancestor Abraham was shown to be right with God by his actions when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see, his faith and his actions worked together. His actions made his faith complete. And so it happened, just as the scriptures say. Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. He was even called the friend of God. So you see, we are shown to be right with God by what we do, not by faith alone. Rahab the prostitute is another example. She was shown to be right with God by her actions when she hid those messengers and sent them safely away by a different road. Just as the body is dead without breath, so also faith is dead without good works. So faith is belief that leads to action. Paul also speaks about faith and action in his letter to the Ephesians. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. It is not the works that save us. We're not saved by works. Paul tells us that we are saved for works. Faith will result in changes in our lives. I've heard of and even known some people who claim to be followers of Christ. However, their lifestyle remains the same after they became Christians as it was before they became Christians. They still live the same way, talk the same way, and had the same mindset as they did when they were living in rebellion to God. Were they exercising true faith? Jesus said, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments," meaning that our actions will reveal the change our hearts have gone through when we became true followers of Christ. Conversely, if our lives do not exhibit a change of allegiance from self to Jesus, we have good reason to doubt our salvation is real at all. John writes, "And by this we know that we have come to know him, if we keep his commandments." True faith is evidenced by a change in the way we act. Faith results in changed priorities. If anything in our life is more important than God, we should examine ourselves to see if we have truly given our lives to Christ. If our lives are focused more on our jobs, our favourite sports team, the next new technological toy, our love life, or anything else that diverts the centre of our attention away from God, we should question the validity or at least the maturity of our faith. Some areas that reveal the focus of our hearts are our finances. If we are so focused on how much money we're making or how high up the corporate ladder we can climb, we must readjust our focus. Our focus is on wealth instead of God. Also, on the other side of the coin, if we're so worried about not having enough money, our focus is on our need rather than on the one who provides for those needs. Our thought life. What we spend our time thinking about reveals a lot about what we think is most important in our lives. While it's not wrong to think about things other than God, when we think about things to the extent that any thoughts of God are pushed out of our minds, we're in danger of shipwrecking our faith, as described in 1 Timothy chapter 1. The third thing is our priorities. How we spend our time, money and energy reveals what we think is important. Where does God fit into your life? How important is prayer and Bible study as opposed to making sure you do not miss your favourite television show? The Bible tells us to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Matthew chapter 6. Our relationship with God should be the most important thing in our lives if we have true faith. People talk about exercising their faith. This is in the sense that faith is evident by actions. I think that exercising our faith is also a way of growing or increasing our faith. It's a bit like an athlete. An athlete might believe they can win a race, but just believing it will never win them a race. They need to actually get out there and run if they are to have any chance of winning. But they can also improve their ability by exercising. It's the same with a musician. They improve their ability by practicing. So what do I mean by exercising our faith? The more we obey God and do the things he has created us to do, the greater our faith will become. In the example of having faith to sit on a chair, why is it that I have that faith? My faith is based on experience. It's because I've sat on chairs many times and they've held me. I've exercised faith in chairs. The more we exercise our faith in the Lord and experience his faithfulness and goodness in our lives, the more faith we will have to do bigger things. I mentioned before about the change in our attitude to finances as an evidence of our faith. Something that I've learnt over time, the more I've trusted God with my finances, is that you can never outgive God. God does ask us to exercise our faith, to increase our faith in this area of our lives. In Malachi chapter 3, it says, "Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it." A lack of exercise or practice by an athlete or a musician leads to a decrease in their ability. In the same way, if we are not exercising our faith will decrease. Faith is like a muscle. If we're not exercising it regularly, it will shrivel up. So let's get back to our text for today from Mark chapter 3. Jesus said to the man who had a withered hand, "Step forward." Before Jesus healed the man, Jesus wanted him to take action. He said to the man, "Step forward." God may be calling you to do something or make some changes in your life. But for one reason or another, you're finding it difficult to begin, to start taking action. There is a saying that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Sometimes it can be so hard to take that first step, to overcome what fears or concerns you might have. But unless you take that first step, you're never going to experience the full measure of blessing that God has for you. This was certainly the case for me when God gave me my second chance. I want to conclude this morning with this verse from Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24. The writer tells us to spur one another toward love and good deeds. That is, to do those things that demonstrate our faith. I hope that this message this morning has been able to encourage you today to step forward.